You certainly have to begin by saying, we're going to teach this. We're going to be very transparent
Mm-hmm.
about what we believe. And that's what's going to be taught. There's so much that happens in education that's a kind of bait and switch.
Mm.
People say that this is what they hold to, but then you find out actually, no, it's not what's held to. It's not what's actually taught in the classroom. So there needs to be fundamentally a sincerity, an integrity, a transparency
Mm-hmm.
about what is believed, and a willingness to defend and assert those convictions. But then,
I
of
like to
course,
say it will be an open source.
open
You don't want to
source.
hide anything from anybody, and you always want to be very forthright and open with this is where we stand, and this
Exactly
is what
right.
we believe.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And from our standpoint as a seminary, we think we owe that not just to our students and not just to donors and others who are part of our community, but we really fundamentally owe that to the churches that have given us this task, because
Mm-hmm.
they have certain convictions, and it's incumbent upon us to maintain those convictions. And so there can't be any division there. But it's not just the open statement of the truth,
Mm.
although it has to be an open statement of the truth. It also has to be something that the faculty themselves really believe and really practice in their own life. So it's not that we're saying that only doctrine's important, practice isn't.
No, no,
What
no,
we're saying
no,
is
yeah.
practice flows out of
It
doctrine.
must, yeah.
And so if you could introduce me to someone who supposedly had all the right doctrines without the corresponding measure of personal godliness, well, what I would say to you is they don't really understand and appreciate and fully embrace those doctrines.
Mm.
But so what we need are men who are going to instruct and teach in such a way that they are both openly stating the truth, but also they actually believe it,
Mm.
and it's part
Mhm.
of their lives, and it's part
Mhm.
of their life in their home and their life in the world, and the way in which they teach in a church context. And
Yeah.
so it has to be a full-orbed thing. It can't just be one or the other, but it certainly has to begin with open statement of what we believe the Bible teaches.
Yeah, wonder if you could speak on that point and flesh that out more, just in terms of how pastors in their churches, how parents in their families, and especially how professors in a seminary can model that sort of thing to their people that they're leading, that they're teaching, especially with regard to not only scripture, but especially with regard to the standards. How do you model? A deference, but also not that, yeah, we subscribe to these things, but they're collecting dust over on the corner, but that, no, we subscribe to these things ex animo,
Mhm.
that we love these and we live this. These are things that are not constricting us, but they're giving us life. I mean, I understand these are secondary standards. It's not scripture, but you get my point. Like these doctrines are useful to us, and they help us to flourish rather than just being some sort of rules or procedures that we have on the side.
There are a lot of ways where this comes out. I think it can come out in our worship, our commitment to public worship, our
Mm.
commitment to the particular expression of the local church that most closely corresponds to the doctrine that we believe. So it has a worship component, a church component, we might say. It also has a family component. There are undeniably things that our standards teach that pertain directly to family life, to the way in which you order your time, to the way in which your week is structured, to the way in which you think about and pray for your children and raise your children. There are implications for how you understand your marriage and how it is that you would engage with your wife,
Hmm.
and so almost every area of your life has something that's touched on it by the standards themselves in some way, or at
Hmm.
least they give a backdrop to the way you're going to live your life. And so one question to ask is that the case? I mean, are
Hmm.
you living a life of godly sincerity? I mentioned this morning, and I think it's profound. When the Apostle Paul evaluates his ministry near the end of his life, the kinds of ways he describes it are things like, we served God with a clear conscience,
Hmm.
or we behaved with sincerity
Yeah.
before you. And so I think there needs to be a wholeness and an integrity to our lives. But then the other question you could ask is, do you actually teach these things and live by these things and teach others to live by these things even outside of the classroom setting? So
Yes.
look, there are all kinds of ways in which we know the standards seem to cut against the grain of how people today generally think. There's a particular view of creation. There's a particular view of the scriptures. There's a particular view of justification, of election. It teaches us about worship,
How we relate to each other,
how we relate to
inferiors,
how we
superiors.
relate to
Yeah.
each other,
Yeah.
inferiors, superiors.
And equals.
If you read through the larger catechism's exposition of the Ten Commandments, you
Hmm.
cannot fail to find specific ways in which the Ten Commandments ought to apply to your life in a kind of a granular
Yeah.
sense
Oh, yeah.
in terms of how you think and how you engage. And so those are the kinds of tells almost.
Mm.
Does someone really hold to this?
Mm.
Or is it just a framework for one little piece of my
Uh-huh.
life?
Well, that's something you and I both know really well just from history, that this hasn't always been the case in American Presbyterianism. There hasn't always been integrity or sincerity with regard to confessional subscription. That there was a good stretch where a majority of the Presbyterian Church, at least in the North, but it became true in the South as well, were on the books subscribing to these things, but they would subscribe to them almost as if, well, yeah, these were good for the church a couple hundred years ago, but we need a new theory for the present, modern world. Or this was good for to have here as an option, as a potential theory,
Right.
but there needs to be room for other theories. I'm thinking specifically also of the Auburn Affirmation and this
Mm-hmm.
idea of the
Mm-hmm.
atonement. That yes, we're all cool with the traditional understanding of the atonement, but we should have a tent wide enough to include people that maybe Jesus didn't die and was raised historically, and there was that idea. And Machen and others, especially that came on to form the OPC, were so insistent, to go back to your original quote, that no, these things matter. These things happened in history, and we need to take seriously our confessional statements. And if we are ministers of the gospel and we've taken vows to these things, then that matters. It means something. And it's not just, I vow not to teach contrary to this, but in my heart, I'm going to believe whatever I will. No, no, no. This, we're taking vows that we believe these things without reservation, from the heart, that we believe and affirm that this is true, and that we are going to seek to teach and minister according to these things. Um, we need to take that seriously.